going to use someone else's. That'll be yeah, no, that's what I read, yeah. You said that? That's crazy. I think that he's got more obviously got more influence, and he's got the concept of decentralisation is just a double and if you don't have anyone, if it's decentralised and no one's going to represent things like the same way they will yeah, that's right, exactly. And they also want benefits. Ah, that's right. I came to one a while ago. I would say that. I've been here about a year ago now. Finishing my uni degree, so 5 times. I don't know how they're linked, but stuff anyway. Really? I don't know about it. Country towns. You been to country towns like Victoria or anything like that? Oh yeah. I guess it's like an area of farming. It's just yeah. I think that it's turning into that, but there's not enough people. So, and the thing is that people don't go there because everything's on the East Coast. That's right. And now, I left because there's basically no jobs. You know, I can't do anything about it. So, all my friends. Yeah, it's either Melbourne. Yeah. Population's moving to younger people are going those ways. I don't know about older people to go. Yeah, right, okay. Yeah, fascinating. Have you been there? Okay. Yeah, it's a nice place. Yeah, it's not disturbed like the other countries. Sydney is like an urban. That's right, exactly. Who do you like first?
Yeah, I guess Sydney and Melbourne, or Sydney especially, seems like it's too cities.
Yeah,
like there's no like real too isolating. Yeah. Are you work out of RCL?
Yeah. I actually have been working with travel platforms.
Oh wow, cool. Awesome. So you do social media marketing? Oh, cool. Yeah, cool. Yeah, because I work with Alex at like Fabric, Stash, which is now Amber. Oh, did you? Oh, okay. We changed the name to Amber, because it was copyrighted. Yeah. So, well, I think we're kind of like now going back to the stealth mode. Yes. Yeah.
What do you do with?
Oh, I'm in it. I do like like RCL.
I really like this. I've been working there for about a year and a half now.
Yeah.
Good environment, good events.
There's so many people there.
There's a lot of people that expand even
Yeah. There's so many people there, like great network.
We don't really have lights,
Happy network.
Oh, we're not really travel like this. Yeah, I was already working there.
Yeah, I'd love to like do some seminar RCL, get some ideas people like become more ingrained in
Plus, you guys are just right down the road.
Yeah.
Alright,
Next to your best friend.
try to kick off. We have a few mic issues, so we'll see how we go. But first, thanks everyone for coming. Crazy turnout.
What a turnout. Oh, that works.
That sounds good.
All right. Awesome. So great turnout. So first of all, I mean, these are community events. So I mean, myself and Hayden, Brendan threw in for the pizza. So round of applause for Brendan. Two of the other boys, Mikey at L, threw in for beers. So thanks to them. Said it's all about the community. So we've got a superstar moderator tonight, Jono, who's going to host. So I'll throw it in. So that's about all I want to say first. So we'll crack on with the format. So John's going to moderate. Anything else we want to disclose before? No?
After party.
Oh yeah, after party. Good point. Where's that? Brew? Alright, Brew. So Caleb, Travel by Bit, is doing merchants around Brisbane and around Australia. He's got a lot, you would have seen Channel 7, the airport. So we're going to try and support him by going down to Brew, which is just off Queen Street Mall, for some beers afterwards. And we've got also Bitcoin Pizza Day on the 22nd of May, which is in the Valley on Ann Street. What was it? New York Pizza. But anyway, it's on the meetup site. So without further ado, I'll throw to Jono and take it from there.
Alright, so the idea is that we can't have one of the participants moderating the chat, so Lucas has got me in to moderate the discussion today. And before we all got here, we all agreed on the format, and you've all got a copy of that, you've had a look. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to give each person a chance to introduce themselves so you get an idea of who they are. And then we'll get into the presentation proper. So each team is going to spend about 15 minutes, all going well, presenting their case. Then we're going to visit the 5 key points, because there are 5 key things that everybody agreed before we got here were the main points of distinction between the two types of currencies. And then we'll get into a rebuttal. So both teams will get a chance to ask questions of one another about their presentation. And then we'll get into a question and answer from you guys. So that is the format for today. We've all agreed to it, so hopefully we can stick with it. And the first team to present will be Bitcoin Cash. They'll be followed by Bitcoin. But before we get into that, just a quick introduction from each of you to give the audience an idea of who you are and why you've been selected to present your currency. So I'll start with Lucas, and then we'll just hand the microphone down.
Yeah, and just a little bit of a correction on the format. I was going to run a bit of a history to up to the fork and a bit of the terminology. So I'll do that in a second. So yeah, Lucas, my name's Lucas. Currently working with Consensus. I learned about Bitcoin in 2010, got into about 2011, started hosting the Brisbane meetup in March 2013. And yeah, it's just been growing ever since. I think there was a few people, like, I had to call Scotty up, come to my meetup, wrapped up a few people to do the crowd fillers. It's just growing ever since. And like, yeah, again tonight, it's fantastic to see a lot of people. But yeah, so I follow the technology, software engineer by trade, and yeah, I love seeing these events. I love seeing the turnouts.
Hey guys, Alex. Been around the space for a number of years, but really quietly. Only in the last, let's say, 2 years, I've actually started to join the meetups and talk about it and do things like that. Working on a number of projects in the space, which I think is similar to everyone. And my background's mainly in things like economics, history, evolution, all that sort of stuff, but also tech. So I've had quite a bit of time working in tech. So I'm going to try and give a bit of a, I don't know, mathematical, logical, step-by-step case on what I think this whole debate's about. So yeah.
Hi guys, my name is Caleb. I'm the CEO of Trouble by Bit. So Trouble by Bit is a Bitcoin payment processor. We enable any business to accept payments in crypto. The reason why I'm in this space is I believe very strongly in a censorship-resistant form of money. I come from a country, Malaysia, which has been under the rule of a dictator for many, many years. He's abused the financial system to exert control of the opposition, to exert control over the public. I'm very happy to announce last week we voted that Prime Minister out. But I guess Bitcoin and crypto represents to me a very, very important step in preserving liberty in society. And that's why I'm interested in this space.
My name's Hayden Otto. I've been in Bitcoin since mid-2016. I first made a Bitcoin transaction while I was in my second year at university studying information technology. And since then, Bitcoin has been my #1 priority every single day. I now teach people how to do trading and technical analysis in order to accumulate more Bitcoin in their portfolio or other cryptocurrencies if they wish to do so. And I'm running free meetups on that every now and again. And I'm also helping run the Bitcoin Cash meetup in Brisbane.
My name's Brendan Lee. I am probably the most recent person to get into crypto in the panel. So I bought my first Bitcoin 4 days after the Bitcoin Cash hard fork. Since then, I've spent a very long time learning about all aspects of Bitcoin and found myself coming down on the side of Bitcoin Cash in almost every one of those aspects. So since then, I've started a company in crypto selling a wallet security product called Coin Storage Guru. I also co-run the Bitcoin Cash meetup with Hayden, and I'm a passionate advocate.
My name is Herman, and I'm a director of a blockchain technology development company. I've also written a Bitcoin client from scratch in code, so I understand Bitcoin protocol at the byte level. I'm also involved with many other blockchain projects, both in the cryptocurrency, smart contract, and layer 2 sort of space as well, and a whole bunch of other stuff as well. Thank you.
Should we just mention how the panel came about? So, did you want to, Brenda?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, just Lucas was just saying a little bit on how the panel came about. So, we're all members of the Brisbane Blockchain Collaboration Telegram group, and there were some fairly vociferous arguments about different aspects of Bitcoin, and we decided to that it would be good to actually, bring this public and have a panel style discussion about it, and really, in a civilized and respectful way, talk about it, and try to help everybody else make their own decisions. So, yeah.
So it's a free group to join.
It's a free group. Everyone's free to ask questions about any aspect of what we're talking about.
So yeah, there's a lot of, I guess, Telegram groups around Australia, so we decided to make a bit more Brisbane focused. I put the link up on the meetup site too, so anyone can join and we discuss things like this. So that's, like I said, that's together.
Excellent. So, is that working? Excellent. So, and so the reason why I'm here is just to try and keep the discussion flowing along nice and fairly. And even though they're sitting together like friends here, there is a little bit of a rivalry here. So hopefully we can all remain friends and cordial. The three people on the left are all here effectively to promote why they think Bitcoin is the better currency. The three gentlemen on the right are here for Bitcoin Cash. So with that context out of the way, the first team, or the first group to present today will be the Bitcoin Cash people. So you guys now have a few minutes to explain why you think Bitcoin Cash is superior.
Do we want to do the history first, or we just jump into it?
Well, can you take it in 5 minutes? Like, can you nail it?
Yeah. So
maybe we do that first quickly.
Go for it, yeah.
Alright, so I guess there's a lot of people and a lot of questions, so I just try to do a bit of a slideshow now to just try and set the terminology, and I think we all looked at this and we all kind of agreed that this is accurate. So again, Brendan with these coin storage, so sponsoring the meetup, so thanks to him, so check him out. So I just wanted to try and be a bit factual about how we got here and try and maybe quick education on some of the terminology. So you often hear about versions. So there's a couple of things we need to think about when we talk about versions. So there's the software versions, which are the clients, which I'll talk to in a second what they are, and there's the protocol versions, and those two shouldn't be mixed up. So Bitcoin QT was the first client that was committed to GitHub at version 0.3. So before that, it was just floating around probably on Dropbox or something, I'm not sure. And they decided to actually push it to GitHub. So GitHub is a source control system, so we can see through time the changes to the client of Bitcoin. The Bitcoin client QT. It was renamed to Bitcoin Core, and it's currently at version 0.16. Protocol versions are what the clients adhere to, so it's the version of the underlying protocol, which sometimes gets changed in either hard forks or soft forks. So I think, Brenda, do you want to quickly discuss the difference of hard forks or soft forks, or do you want me to?
I guess probably the best distinction that you can make between a soft fork and a hard fork is that a soft fork is something that is released with forward compatibility in mind. So forward compatibility is when you release an update to the protocol in such a way that it does not break compatibility with existing versions of the clients that run that protocol that are in the field. Whereas a hard fork is something that requires all versions of the client and all the different versions of the client different. So on Bitcoin Cash, certainly there are about 6 different implementations of the client. So there's actually a Bitcoin Cash hard fork happening today, which we will want to talk a little bit about later on. But what that means is that all of the, I think it's 2,000 or so Bitcoin Cash nodes that are running today must upgrade in order to support the new features that are being enabled. So that's the prime difference between a soft and a hard fork.
Excellent. So some of the clients or wallets or nodes. So again, this is the piece of software that then looks at the blockchain and presents you information. So I like to think as Firefox and Chrome are examples of clients. We call them web browsers that enable us to get onto the internet. We can actually do it from other things like terminal with using the actual protocol like HTTP and the verbs get, but we generally use the client. So there's a distinction there between the client and the protocol. There are many different versions. There are very different client versions. Like with Bitcoin, there's Bitcoin Core, multi-bit, Electron, etc. They're generally open source, so we can see there's nothing up our sleeves. And generally we can make modifications we so choose. Bitcoin Core is the most popular. I make that claim because if we look at if we go to CoinDance, we can actually see on the network how many clients are propagating the network, and as of a couple of days ago, of the 10,000 nodes, Bitcoin Core had the lion's share at 9,000 nodes. So, so then that's very important to note, because if that client is the most popular, those developers also have 90% share of the network or what happens. So if they want to make a feature in their client because it's the most popular, they're a 90% majority. Like I said, it was previously called Bitcoin QT, and it was decoupled with the daemon in 7, so you can run a headless application as opposed to the full client in version 7. Clients must adhere to the protocol, otherwise they're not clients of the network. So fast forward to the block size, when we started talking about the block size. So they actually introduced the block limit on that commit, so we can go back in history. As I mentioned, the source was pushed up to GitHub, so we can actually go through time and see what actually happened with the clients. And if we look at that commit, we can see they added this max block size, and there's a thread on Bitcoin Talk about why that was introduced. So some of the cash proponents might say that this was sneakily added in, etc. But I think that was around 2011 or 2012. So anyway, check out that source and you can see exactly when that commit happened. So some of the things we'll talk to tonight about is Lightning Network. So Lightning Network uses a technology called payment channels. So payment channels was first discussed by Mike Hearn around 2013. He uses what we call multi-signature wallets, and it's really a way to do transactions between party to party. So I'll show you an example right now. So me over here and the bartender over there on the right-hand side. So the idea is that sending Bitcoin may not be viable in, say, a scenario like a bar tab. So what I can agree to is with the bartender is a payment channel. So we set up a multi-signature wallet, which is a 2 of 2. The first thing I do is I'm going to drink a lot tonight, so I agree that I will fund that channel with 1 Bitcoin. But what I do is I create a first payment with a lock time. In the end, it's supposed to say plus 30 days. So I have a transaction that allows me to refund out of that multi-signature wallet in 30 days' time. So what that does is assures me that if the bartender does not do anything, if he's a jerk and keeps my transactions and doesn't broadcast them, that in 30 days I can actually retrieve my Bitcoin. So the next part is I fund the multi-signature wallet with 1 Bitcoin. So I'm kind of, the analogy, I'm starting that bar tab. Then as the night goes on, I present a Bitcoin transaction of, say, 0.1 Bitcoin, and I give it to the bartender, and I receive my beer. But the bartender, he can, and I also create a complementary transaction where I send the 0.9 back to myself. So again, the bartender at any point in time can cash that transaction, and I get my receiving 0.9, and we agree that's fair. As the night goes on, I then create a second transaction of, say, 0.2 Bitcoin with the change coming back to, sorry, that should be 0.8, and I give it to the bartender, and now I'm pretty happy I got my 2 beers. So we can see that the game theory says that the bartender is always going to take the higher transaction. Okay, so what we're doing is we're creating an off-chain solution. These transactions, we can argue, are only the business between myself and the bartender, and no one else is on the blockchain. The only transactions committed was the one when I start the channel, and at the end, when I close off the bar tab, he then broadcasts the final transaction, so we can make these off-chain transactions. Lightning then extends this theory to say, well, we can create, I guess, multiple payment channels between different actors. I mean, if we go back to that analogy, it only works in a scenario like a bar tab if it's where it's a repeatable transaction on a time. What Lightning tries to address is if all these people are making these payment channels, then perhaps we can create markets between them, and I can send it to this guy. He then is in depth for so much, so he can pass it on, and we can create this network of payments. It could be argued that maybe this is insecure because we're not writing back to the blockchain until it gets settled. So I think we're all in agreement with that analogy. Yeah.
No, well, there's a few caveats that we can talk about if you'd like. So that was the Lightning Network slide, was it? Yes.
Yeah.
So with the okay. So with this Lightning Network, it's important to note that those tokens that are on those on the network, they're not actually Bitcoins. They're IOUs for Bitcoins.
Yes. They're transactions that haven't been broadcast yet.
Right, so when people say that you've got, oh, I've got X amount of Bitcoin on my Lightning wallet, it's not actually you owning X amount of Bitcoin, it's that you own X amount of IOUs for Bitcoins. and there's a question about fungibility there in the economic analysis of whether or not that's the same as necessarily as having a Bitcoin on the blockchain. And I think many people would prefer to have, and it's just true if you just ask people that a large number of people would prefer to have it on chain than on a Lightning network.
Yeah, it's a fair point, and I'm sure we'll
there's a few other things too that we can talk about. Just one more point. The big issue with that is, like, if you're on the Lightning network and the Lightning network crashes for some reason, all those people that are owed Bitcoins that have those IOUs, they're all going to like panic with each other at the same time, just kind of settle their transaction on the blockchain, and that's going to result in a huge spike in network usage, and the transaction limit the artificial 1 megabyte transaction limit will be hit, and will cause a huge spike in fees. And it can actually lead to a loss of funds. It's been proven, like, mathematically it can lead to loss of funds. So it's not like a totally secure system as it's been promoted.
So it's a good point. So when I create that transaction only exists on my hard drive. So there is, you know, an opportunity where that could be lost, etc. So, but we always do have that refund transaction. But, you know, if the bartender loses his transaction scripts, then, you know, then he might be, you know, defrauded, I guess, in that event. So there is a disaster, there's a disaster recovery problem there. So good points. So another technology is Segregated Witness, or SegWit, which is probably one of the most contentious ones. So Segregated Witness is the attempt to remove the input signature out of the transactions. So without getting too technical, blocks are composed of the following data. We have the version, the nonce, the Merkle root, etc. We also have the collection of transactions, which make up around 95, if not 99% of the payload. Transactions have a couple of properties. They have the inputs, where transactions come from, and the outputs, where transactions are going. So, quick slide on that. We'll go up Wiki. So, what Segregated Witness aims to do is, like I said, remove the signature out of the inputs. So inputs are made up of these properties. They have the previous output hash, they have the previous output index, they have the script length, the script signature, and a sequence. So the thinking is, if we can decouple from the payload what we call into a extra block, then we can reduce the amount of payload that's actually broadcast on the main blockchain. So I'll talk to a little bit more tonight on the advantages of that, but that's major thinking. It's kind of decoupling the signature out of the transaction.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess from my perspective, Segregated Witness tries to sell itself as a scaling solution, and in reality what Segregated Witness is there for is to act as a malleability fix to enable Lightning. Segregated Witness does not really give you that much of a benefit in terms of scaling. What it actually does is takes what would normally fit in 1.7 megabytes of block space, splits it up into some transaction data and some witness data, but because the witness data has to be pointed back to the transaction data, it actually bloats that data out to about 4 megabytes, only 1 megabyte of which gets stored on chain. So technically, yes, it does save a ton.
This is the 101. I'm going to get into the details of it.
It saves a little bit of block space.
But to interest of time, fast forward to August 2017, we couldn't be friends. We had it for, and this is why we're here tonight. So, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Well, Hayden's going to talk first.
Yeah, so I think we'll get on with the main event. So, Bitcoin Cash.
Yeah, right. So the reason why I am on the Bitcoin Cash side of this all is because I got into Bitcoin, and it was when I read the white paper, it says actually that it's peer-to-peer electronic cash. And what happened, and this escalated a lot during the time period where I got involved, but I did study the history at the same time. a group came and they took over and they changed the narrative and they said that Bitcoin is no longer meant to be cash, it's meant to be a store of value, and they started promoting all these catchphrases and stuff on social media like HODL, which is total garbage, because if you're HODLing, you're not actually doing anything beneficial to the network. You need to be spending it and increasing adoption, like Travel by Bit is doing actually, and that is how you grow the network, right? So what I also noticed happened was that this group that controls Bitcoin Core, known as Blockstream, they emerged in about 2015, I believe. But what happened was that there's a guy named Gavin Andresen, and he was handed the torch by Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, to control the Bitcoin GitHub. And this guy allowed other people access to the GitHub, who then booted him off the GitHub. They claim that he was hacked or some crap, but that's not the case. They never reinstated his access. So then this group took over control of the GitHub repository, and they formed the company Blockstream. Blockstream has received funding from a group known as AXA, and that is a globalist organization with ties to the Bilderberg Group, who are not for peer-to-peer electronic cash. They're actually very much on the side of the banks. And so they're basically under the control of Bilderberg, you could say, or AXA. And in addition to that, Blockstream has also received a lot of funding from a group known as Digital Currency Group. Digital Currency Group also owns some propaganda outlets like CoinDesk, the big conference that everyone's at right now. They're owned by Digital Currency Group. So things like this are just a big mouthpiece for Blockstream and the Lightning Network. And they've been able to totally shift the narrative or like ideology behind Bitcoin from being a free, decentralized peer-to-peer electronic cash, free for anybody to use globally and send whatever amount of money you want anywhere in the world without any kind of restrictions or anyone telling you what you want to do. And they brought in a technology known as Lightning Network, which actually makes Bitcoin no longer peer-to-peer electronic cash. It keeps the banks relevant because they're going to be the only, this is the plan, they're going to be the only ones who can afford to run a node 24/7, keep it operational, and kind of like the living room of Satoshi, people will be opening payment channels with these bigger hubs because it's convenient. They're the ones who can stay online 24/7 to facilitate payments through the Lightning Network. In addition to this, there has also been massive online censorship campaigns which have been funded with this money that has been invested in Blockstream. And they pay off prominent Twitter users, YouTubers, people on Reddit to go and promote a particular viewpoint. And also they've paid off the admins of Reddit Bitcoin and Bitcoin Talk, a guy named Famos. They've paid him off completely, and now that place, nobody likes to go there if they know what they're talking about because they realize that it's totally censored. And any kind of viewpoint challenging the Lightning Network store of value agenda is deleted. So now there is a community which has grown massively over the last year in particular. It's Reddit BTC, and that is now where most of the Bitcoin Cash people are hosting their discussions. Would you like to add to any of that, guys? That's just where I'm coming from.
Well, yeah, I'll add a few things. So those views are quite comprehensive, and many may find that controversial, especially on the Bitcoin core side. But without really asking the question if any of that's true or not, the interesting observation is that the Bitcoin community was once like growing exponentially in adoption, and then all of a sudden all that energy is now being re-diverted and is fighting itself, and it's kind of stalled adoption a little bit. And that's I just find that's a very interesting observation that may or may not support what you said. But yeah, that's just all I want to add.
Yeah, I guess what I was going to talk about was the fundamental difference in what is a Bitcoin Cash transaction versus what is a Lightning transaction. So when you conduct a Bitcoin Cash transaction, that is you asking the network to note that you're transferring X amount of Satoshis to someone else. Now, the miner who mines that transaction and puts that note into the block has absolutely no stake in any part of that transaction. They never touch the money. The only thing that they get paid for is to write a little, 250 byte note on the ledger that I paid Herman $5 or whatever it is. On the Lightning Network, for you to transact money, you have to take your real money and prepay it into a channel. So now you actually have someone who's holding your money for you. You've staked your money on the network, and then if you don't actually have a direct payment channel with that person, your money might have to make several hops between different payment channels in order to reach the person that you're trying to pay. So not only is that transaction no longer peer-to-peer, it's now being staked. Your money is passing through the hands of several other parties, and each of those guys is going to take a slice. And it might be a small slice, but it's still a slice. And so that I think is really what comes down to the major difference between Bitcoin and Lightning.
How does it make it any better than the current financial system that we're using today? In other words, it's not.
So I guess the other thing I wanted to talk about was the original promise of Bitcoin. And if you read the white paper, it's right there in the title, peer-to-peer electronic cash. And the goal of Bitcoin was to build a system where anybody, anywhere in the world, can transact with anybody else, anywhere in the world, in a completely censorship-free and permissionless environment for low or almost no fees. Now, for that to happen, the Bitcoin network will need to handle upwards of, we think, somewhere around 500 billion transactions a day. So that's 50 transactions a day for 10 billion people. And the Bitcoin Cash teams that are working on the new technology are running headlong into solving this problem. So we have a gigabit block network, which has already demonstrated technologies for transmitting blocks up to 300 gigabytes and working towards terabyte block sizes, basically so that when we have that explosive growth, we'll be ready.
Just to support those arguments, one of the things that should be considered in this argument is, like this whole BCH versus BTC debate is, at the end of the day, we're in like the 1970s of computing right now in terms of blockchain. So the idea that whatever's done now is going to be fixed forever, I think is short-sighted. And I think that crypto is going through some type of Darwinian evolution right now. And in that Darwinian evolution, that cauldron of pressure and evolution that's been forced on the entire crypto sector, those coins that are most able to change and adapt have the highest probability of survival. And for that reason, and that reason alone, I believe that Bitcoin Cash has the higher chance of survival because it's proven that it's willing to adapt to an ever-changing technology landscape. And that's something that the Bitcoin, unfortunately, Bitcoin Core people have been pretty reticent to do, and they're quite on the opposite view of that. Some may dispute that, but they like the 1 megabyte limit, for example, is a clear example of that. I think it's quite an unreasonable, arbitrary, centrally planned limit that really has no economic or technical research to support it. And I think that for that reason, the ability to change and adapt is what's important for any crypto. I think Bitcoin, in terms of Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Core, Bitcoin Cash.
I think that's where we're done. So if you guys want to.
I'd just like to mention, as I tried to explain in the slides before, that it's not Bitcoin Core. Bitcoin Core is a client that jumps on the Bitcoin network. It's analogous to saying Firefox is the internet. Okay, so when Homer mentions Bitcoin Core, it's not. It's one of the wallets that get on the Bitcoin network.
Can I just respond to that?
Cool.
Just to moderate, is it okay if like we reference each other that we have a chance to do a little counter response? Is that okay? What's up to you?
I think we're going to do it at the end.
Just chuck us a mic real quick. So what we tried to do, guys, because this is obviously a very convoluted topic, what we tried to do before we got here was over a beer or two discuss the format for the conversation today. And as you can tell, we've kind of not stuck to plan. So how about this for an idea, guys?
You guys made that plan. I wasn't there at the table when you guys were discussing it.
I actually,
it's okay.
I hand wrote a copy. I couldn't find the photocopier. I hand wrote the format for each team. So I did what I could, guys. How about this for an idea? If you just check out your format there.
He's hopped again.
So the 5 main things that I wanted to get, and I thought the audience might like to get the opposing ideas sort of bit by bit. Here were the 5 ideas. The block size, which is obviously very controversial. SegWit, which we've got some explanation for already. The Lightning Network, ditto. Fees, and mining centralisation. So later on in this conversation, each team will get a chance to give their version of what they think is ideal, and there'll be a chance for rebuttal as well. Sound good?
Yep.
Excellent. So we've gotten the presentation from the Bitcoin Cash team. We haven't gotten the presentation from the Bitcoin team. So I'll give you guys...
One thing.
Now we've got plenty of time later.
We weren't aware that we could bring slides, just so you know. That wasn't told.
If you want us to take them down, we can.
No, it's okay.
That's it.
It's just so the audience knows.
You guys need a crunch.
Alright, so getting serious again, guys. So what we'll do now, let's get back to the format. We'll give the Bitcoin... What would you prefer to be called? Just Bitcoin? Is that the idea?
Well, that's us, though. We're Bitcoin.
What we're going to do is we're going to give the Bitcoin team, we'll just call them that for now, we'll give you guys 10 minutes or so to give your introduction about why you still think your currency is ideal.
Cool.
And then once we've got your opening presentation, then we'll get back to the 5 key points and hopefully, guys, have a productive conversation. How's that sound?
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right.
10 minutes, guys.
Alright guys, I'm going to try to keep it to 10 minutes, and I'm going to have to jump down here because I want to use my pointer. I don't know if the cameras are going to see me because I'm a midget. But thanks to everyone that came along. Credit where credit's due. We've got a smart panel here on the Bitcoin Cash side. Hayden's one of the best traders I've ever seen. I've been trading for like, 12 years, and he's definitely probably the best I've seen. And these boys here from a technical perspective are brilliant. So, sorry, not sorry for anyone who gets butthurt out of this. Get over it, grow up. And my approach, just so you guys know, I'm going to take a first principles approach. I'm going to talk about engineering, economics, math, history, evolution. I'm going to avoid conspiracies, dogma, religious overtones, and personal attacks. So I'm going to do none of that shit. I'm going to try at least. So that's my medium. I'm actually going to try and put this slide into a document or an article so you guys can have a look at it, if you choose to do so. So, why are we here? I think we want the same thing. I just think we've got a different approach or a different way of getting there. So, the case I'm going to make is not so much for Bitcoin or against Bitcoin or for Bitcoin Cash or against Bitcoin Cash per se. I'm going to make a case for the methodology or the strategy I believe is most important for this whole experiment to succeed. Here's an interesting quote from one of my favorite philosophers called Alan Watts, and I think we've got potentially a case of this. It says, "Kindly let me help you, or you will drown," said the monkey, putting the fish safely up a tree. Basically, every disaster, the premise of that little fable is that people generally want to do the right thing, but sometimes they genuinely fuck it up. So keep that little piece in mind when we're going through this. So a couple foundations. Why did Bitcoin work in the first place? I'm actually going to skip ahead 2 slides, and I'm going to actually explain why some people think Bitcoin worked, but it's not the fucking case. Bitcoin was not successful because blockchains are some magical technology. Blockchains are actually pretty boring. They're just a way to run a database. It's not because it's got some magic economic formula of 21 million coins and for some reason that's a magic number and that's why this is going to be the greatest thing ever invented. It's not because it's got some 4-year half-life of mining. It's not how quick the transactions are. It's not how big the blocks are. None of that shit actually matters. The reason Bitcoin worked was because it was a fluke. It was a complete fucking fluke. There's 3 key factors which I've written up here. Number 1, Satoshi disappeared. And he disappeared at a time when there was enough initial traction, enough decentralization to make the thing work. Number 2, it's game theory. It's the fact that we, as humans and as all ecosystems that are natural and living, have this thing called the selfish gene, which allows us to, continue to thrive and survive and win. And number 3, it's network effects. It was allowed to basically spread without anyone trying to stop it or squash it. And it was allowed to do that uninhibited for that until it reached that critical mass, or until it was too late to stop. There's a couple other factors here. The timing of when it was launched. So it was launched at a critical point in time when people were questioning the financial system. It was supported by real libertarians, people who were free market thinkers, crypto anarchists, and all of that. They were the first people behind Bitcoin. It was a 0 to 1 innovation at the time, which means it wasn't an improvement of the existing way of doing things. It was a completely new way of doing things. It's also become the reserve currency of the space. That's a big factor as to why it's continued to maintain dominance. All of the infrastructure has been built around it, and it's the most trusted network, and the players who actually count, so the people who have been there from day one, have most of their funds held in. The timing and the factors listed above are why we, if someone tried to redo Bitcoin now, they would fail. It's not going to work because this was a freak accident, it was a fluke, it happened by accident. Nobody saw this coming in the way it's actually happened. So, because of this weird concoction of stuff that's happened, we have something that is digital, divisible, mathematically secure, it's past the critical mass, it's neutral in just about every way, politically, racially, status, doesn't give a crap who you are, and it's more or less decentralized. Now that's an arguable point, but it's more decentralized than any other system or protocol out there, and on more levels. As a result, it provides 2 things, and these are the important parts that I want you guys to remember throughout this presentation. Number 1, censorship resistance, and number 2, sovereign ownership of a bearer asset. And what a bearer asset means is you hold that asset yourself. Kind of like when we used to hold gold, it was your asset, you held it, whereas current economics or current money is not a bearer asset, you're actually holding IOUs in your wallet. So the key word there that I want you guys to remember is value, and this is a word that's going to come up a bit throughout this, and it's really important thing to understand. So here's the 2 strategies, and I believe one is superior, but let's explore them both. Number 1, this store of value concept around Bitcoin. So what they're saying on this side of the equation is we're saying security first, decentralization, censorship resistance. Let's build a robust network with multi-layer redundancy. Let's create a settlement layer, reserve asset. Let's abstract the frequency, the complexity off-chain, meaning putting that on the payment channels and all of that. And let's create a multi-layer crypto economic guarantee, meaning let's not just keep it with the miners, let's go miners, nodes, and Lightning networks. So it's more robust, or there's more redundant layers. Bitcoin Cash, and you guys can correct me later if I'm wrong here, but saying speed and transaction utility comes first. It's cash, frequency and complexity is kept on the chain. It's linearly scalable. Faster transactions currently, cheaper transactions currently. It's got a single layer of security, i.e. the miners, single layer of validation, i.e. the miners, and my argument in this is going to be that as it scales towards centralization. This is sort of a depiction of how I think the 2 things are going to work. So number 1, Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, because it's a fork, started off as this nerdy shit initially, and the thesis on this side is that we go from nerdy shit to store of value, which is where the early adopters and institutions are, and we evolve into a medium of exchange, which is where mass adoption starts. Whereas Bitcoin Cash, their thesis is, start off with this nerdy shit, let's build a medium of exchange, and that's what's going to take us to the store of value, which I believe goes that way. So, Bitcoin Cash, these are the disadvantages or the weaknesses or the null arguments that I believe are in the case. I'll give you guys a quick snippet of information. I'm going to try to rush through this as fast as possible. There's this thing called the blockchain trilemma, which is you've got scalability, scalability, security, and decentralization. And Vitalik came up with this as a way to just think about how blockchains work. Blockchains aren't designed to be high throughput if you want security and decentralization. If you want high throughput, then you're going to have to sacrifice security, decentralization. So it's not a game that you can get across. You can't have all three without making some sort of sacrifice in one area. There's a big debate now about who's better out of Ethereum and EOS, and people. It's not about what's better; it's about what's more suited to what function. So EOS, for example, has definitely sacrificed security and decentralization for scalability and throughput. Ethereum sort of works the other way, but horses for courses. So the reason I believe transactional currency first strategy is not going to work is because network value needs to come first, and that only comes with security, safety, and trust, not with transactional speed. Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, crypto, all of these, the networks are way too small and therefore volatile. Volatility kills currencies. I don't give a shit how fast your transactions are, whether they're half a second or 10 seconds or whatever the case is, you do not have a currency. A currency is about being stable. People, the mass adoption, like us freaks here, we're a little bit different. We're happy to hold some Bitcoin and watch it go up, down, around in circles, or whatever other cryptocurrency we're involved in. But the mass population doesn't give a shit about that. They want to know that if I bought something for $1 today, sold it for $2 tomorrow, it's still going to be $2, then it's not going to be 50 cents. So you can't put the cart before the horse. This is the model that Bitcoin is trying to take. So it's saying, let's build security first. As a subset of that, let's build some safety and trust. Let's build store of value first. Let's make sure that thesis is right, because that will build network value. And when you have a network value that's large enough, $20,000 swings on Bitcoin, for example, when it's worth $1 million doesn't mean shit. So then what you get is stability. And off the back of stability, you can build a medium of exchange. You cannot build a medium of exchange on something that is unstable. And that is the biggest problem with the Bitcoin Cash thesis at the moment. This is Bitcoin Cash's model. Let's do medium of exchange first. Let's hope that builds network value. Let's hope that builds store of value. We'll think about security up here, stability and safety and trust somewhere on there. So that's sort of the model. Well, that's at least the way I see it at the moment. I could be wrong. Number two, I think they're fighting on the wrong battlefield. So trying to be a transactional currency, they're going to come up against now a bunch of stable coins that are coming out, which offer the transactional currency use case much better than Bitcoin Cash will. Number two, they're fighting against Dash and Litecoin and God knows what else there is out there in terms of altcoins. They're fighting against newer and better transactional currencies. They're fighting against the government digital currencies, which I guarantee are around the corner. Someone's going to release an Australian digital cryptocurrency and trying to blow smoke up our asses. But the general public is going to believe that, and they're going to think, oh, hey, you know what? I can transfer $1 and it's still $1. So that's going to perform. Sorry?
That's what I'm working on in the Philippines, the digital peso.
Well, there you go. So, Lucas, burning at the stake. Then there's corporate charter currencies. So Bitcoin Cash is fighting on their turf. And here's the problem. Has anyone ever heard of some of these companies? Like there's Apple Pay, there's Venmo, there's Alipay, there's WeChat, there's PayPal. I guarantee they're better transactional currencies. Although they're not currencies, they facilitate the transaction of other currencies. For the general public, that shit don't matter. And then on top of that, what happens when Amazon or Facebook, who has how many billions of users, releases a currency? Well,
they've invested in Blockstream, actually.
Congratulations.
Digital Currency Group.
Check this out. Is BCH better than this for the average person? Send money in Facebook Messenger with TransferWise. Boom, free, stable, steady, instant, international. It just solved all of those freaking problems. Here's a couple other applications so they're fighting this fight. PayPal, blah, 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 Venmo, all those guys that I mentioned before. Has anyone ever heard of Snapcash? Yep. Holy shit, I didn't know about that. I mean, I don't even use Snapchat, but that popped up while I was doing my research, so fuck.
I know it's 720, so.
Alright, I'll be really quick. So, incremental utility increases are void. So I think Bitcoin has enough transactional utility for its level of security and decentralization. So I think utility or transactional utility is a feature. And to try and kind of say, look, oh, let's put the feature first and then the essence next, is kind of like trying to get a quick fix, like what Junkie would do. Now, Bitcoin dominance, this is one of the arguments that comes up a lot with this whole space, is that...
Is anyone able to go let someone in at the door?
Yeah, we don't need it.
Cool, thanks man.
That's the little.
Yeah, I'll be fast, I promise. So one of the arguments is that since Bitcoin fees went up, Bitcoin down, and that's a load of shit because Bitcoin is open source software, was always going to be copied. There's zero, competition was always going to come, and it's the classic Gartner hype cycle. Bitcoin went up, then it went down, and then it's going to have its slope of the lightning, just like the internet did, just like any other current technology does. Now this here is the chart of what I think is going on, and this is where I think we've got a problem. So you've got decentralization out on this side, and you could technically build a blockchain with really small blocks with fucking full nodes, but it's impractical, it'll be too expensive, it'll be too, it won't function. Bitcoin's somewhere around here, then you've got less and less decentralized. The problem with Bitcoin Cash is that as it scales, it just becomes a really computationally intensive PayPal, because the more it scales, the less validation layers you have on it. So over here you've got scalable, fast, cheap, single point of failure, censorable. On the other side, expensive, slow, robust, secure, censorship resistant. Quick ones, so...
Let's leave it. Just leave it there. We can talk about the...
I was on a roll.
Alright, so these guys... So what we'll do is we'll give Alex and all the panelists a chance to explain why their currency has advantages over the course of the next hour or so. So we've had the presentation from both teams, and before we got here we were discussing what are the key points of differentiation between the offers, and there were 5 things that came up where both teams agreed this is an important point of differentiation. So what I want to give each team now a chance to do on these 5 points is to explain why your solution is superior on this particular topic. So the 5 topics are block size, SegWit or alternative, Lightning Network or alternative, fees, and mining centralization. So those 5 points, one after the other, will go one team then the next topic, one team then the next, and we'll try and keep it short and concise. And of course, later on tonight we'll take your questions as well. So we'll try and be as quick as we can. So we'll go to Bitcoin Cash first. On the topic of block size, why is your solution superior to Bitcoin? And just grab the mic from, that's the way.
So could you just repeat that question?
So on the topic of block size, why is your solution better than your friends here?
Okay, so the block size issue was the sort of catalyst between, well, that caused the split between the Bitcoin Cash community and the Bitcoin Core community. And the debate was whether or not the block size should be increased. Now, it should be important to understand that version 0.1 of Bitcoin, the original one by Satoshi, didn't have any block limit. It was a 32 megabyte block limit. And that was changed by, I think, by 0.3 by Hal Finney, who thought that as an anti-spam measure, they should add this temporary...
Mike Kern. It's on that commit, I can check.
It was Mike Kern, no. It was Hal Finney that added the block size, I guarantee it. You can look it up on the Bitcoin mailing list, it's written there, and there was a big debate, and actually Satoshi was against it. And, anyway, but yeah, maybe Mike Kern was involved during that release, but I'm pretty sure it was Hal Finney's idea. Anyway, so block size was originally 32 megabyte, then it was restricted to 1 megabyte in order to stop spam, because people could just spam the blockchain. And what happened, so just to be clear with the format, do we get like 5 minutes each, or how does it work?
So basically most of the people who are in the audience, they're aware that one of the main differences between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash is the block limit, or the block size, right? So what I'm asking is, I'm giving you a chance to explain why your solution to this potential problem of Bitcoin is superior to...
And I'll make it short, okay? So the reason it is because it's been academically and empirically proven that large block sizes are a proven scaling mechanism, and the storage issue can be resolved. I'm happy to talk about that later, but it's a complicated topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, look, storage is cheap, right? You can go on Amazon.com and you can buy a hard drive that has enough space to store about 5 years of gigabyte blocks for about $500. So, you know, anyone who's saying, oh, we can't scale the blocks because, oh, blocks are big and it takes too long to download, well, that is just a massive pile of crap, because, you know, hard drives are cheap, network bandwidth goes down in price by an average of, I think it's somewhere around 30 to 50% per year. And, you know, there's absolutely no excuse why Bitcoin couldn't be using, you know, gigabyte blocks today.
So the long story short there is that you guys are saying that let's just increase the block size, it's not a big deal, and it's no problem. That's basically your position. Yes. And we'll go to the Bitcoin team now. So your position, I guess, is let's keep the block sizes limited.
Yeah, so Bitcoin is, I guess, proponent of 1 meg blocks. So there's a few things incorrect there. So yeah, hard drives are cheap, all right, but bandwidth is the bottleneck. So to say that you can download 1 gigabyte blocks every minute, 10 minutes, I don't think is correct. So you could work that out. What's your average internet bandwidth speed? But you also got to remember it's not a one-to-one. So when you have 2 peers, you can also be requested for a block off another peer. So it's not a linear download. So if you've got 10 network clients trying to request the last block of you, you actually need a 10 gigabit per 10-minute upstream. So it's not true. So the takeaway is there's always physical limitations, where it's on disk or bandwidth problems. So by keeping it, I guess, linear, it's also a predictable level of consumption. And I guess that's one of the theories. So the other theory is that, you know, if miners may argue that they make fees from transactions, so the scarcer the block size, the scarcer the size of the block will make the prices of transactions go higher, which the miners will get rewarded proportionally for. So I don't think the argument of resourcing is fair. You know, Hayden also talked at the start about how many nodes, and it will go to a centralized banking model, but you know that you will hit a throughput, you will hit a limitation on disk, which will start to drop off nodes. So only, you know, centralized or enterprise clients will be able to store those blocks.
All right, so we're going to try and race through these 5. There's still plenty of time in the rebuttal section as well. So I'll let you answer quickly on this topic, and then we'll move on to Segwit.
I guess my answer is mostly on the adoption side. So what really matters at the end of this is adoption and low fees for adoption. So our company has enabled Bitcoin Cash payments. Our company has enabled Lightning payments. Both have low fees. Both work. So you don't really need big blocks for this. And 1 megabyte blocks are fine. So in a sense, both work anyway.
Excellent. So as an audience member, the key takeaway here is that Bitcoin Cash is saying, let's just have bigger blocks, it's not a big deal. You guys are saying, let's keep smaller blocks, but we've got a workaround for it. Is that a fair summation there? Yeah, we can come back to that. Let's move on to Segwit. You guys go first. Bitcoin go first this time. Can you explain what Segwit is very quickly, and why Bitcoin and Segwit are the better option?
Well, again, it's when we talk about options, it's even with Lightning Network, it's users get to choose, right? You get to choose whether to create a Segwit address or you don't. So if you want to create and participate in the Segwit program, you're free to do so. So with Segregated Witness, it's a decoupling solution. So we're trying to reduce the signature from the payload. Now, scaling is one advantage of that. The other advantage is if you decouple, we can change the signing algorithm. So say there's a problem with the EDCSA 526, then we could roll out to another signing algorithm.
And what happens with Bitcoin is normally after so many confirmations, we assume that transaction is immutable. So it's a 1 over n problem, a log problem. So the more blocks you get, the more probability you get that that block will never get rolled back. So after n period of time, and we can choose n period of time, do we need to actually keep that signature anymore? So 100 blocks down, like, do I need to know that that signature is valid? Well, I argue that I don't, because the competing 99 blocks will have already validated that. So after n period of time, we can say that this data is no longer useful for the network. We can trash that if we want. We could have some kind of oracle that could always retrospectively create that if we want to, but we're just trying to decouple the solution, keep what's necessary. There's always going to be people or servers or whoever that can store that history if we ever want to. But after n period of time, do we care about was that first signature valid 9 years ago? I'd argue we don't need to anymore, it's just bloat. So let's get rid of that, let's do the spring cleaning, and come on. And then again, we get some other advantages of decouplisation.
The only thing I'll add to that is segregated witnesses. It's an elegant and efficient solution, and and it also enables a better way for Lightning to work. So I mean, Lucas nailed it.
Okay. Yeah. So one of the things that I would just like to cover here is that one of the main reasons that Bitcoin Cash was forked, and there really are two main reasons. One was the block size, but the other was SegWit. So if you read the Bitcoin white paper, you'll see on the very first page that Bitcoin is described as a chain, or the Bitcoin blockchain is described as a chain of digital signatures. And what that means is that there is a signature linking every single Bitcoin from the time that it was created all the way through up until the time that that last Satoshi from that Bitcoin is spent transacting itself into someone else's wallet. So, and for a lot of people, the introduction of SegWit basically meant discarding that architecture and turning Bitcoin from a chain of digital signatures into a chain of associated transactional data with no further record of those signatures. And yeah, that's probably the core difference there, is that people on the Bitcoin Cash side believe that segregated witness fundamentally changes Bitcoin transactions such that they really no longer are Bitcoin transactions. So that if you've got SegWit Bitcoins in your wallet, you're really not holding Bitcoins, because there's no linking digital signatures going back to the first transaction. So that's the primary difference.
And in addition to that, it's important to know that when SegWit was sold to the community, back then there was just one Bitcoin community at the time, it was sold to them heavily on the idea that it would scale the blockchain. And after the soft fork activation, it was evident that it wasn't really a scaling solution at all, and it really was just to support the future Lightning network. And you know, an interesting thing about this topic SegWit is that it really illustrates you know, the point I was making before about the Darwinian evolution of a coin. So when SegWit was first proposed by, I think it was Peter Wheely from the Bitcoin Core team, he proposed it as a hard fork. And in that form, you know, it was digestible to most of what's now known as the Bitcoin Cash community. And people think, well, yeah, well, that's all right, you know, we can do this, but we'll just add it as a hard fork, and maybe we'll also add a few other protocol updates at the same time. But then what happened was that this certain group, a certain clique in the Bitcoin Core community decided, no, that we're not going to hard fork ever. So that means the protocol is now a fossilized entity. It's ossified. It literally has reached protocol ossification. It cannot ever change. And that's been proven. So now they had to squeeze SegWit in this really, and I had to use the word, but a bastardized form, and it was called SegWit soft fork, and that's what actually led me to really question this, because I thought, well, why don't they just do a good sound software engineering approach? Why do they have to do it this way? And then by developing this really complicated Rube Goldberg machine, which is what it's become now, it's actually stifled adoption, because a lot of people are like, well, we want to integrate SegWit, but it's so complicated. You've got to move the signatures all around the block. You've got to keep a separate set, and it's like you've got to do a hash commitment, and then there's all different versions and the addressing, and this is the issue. And it's not a bad issue, but the question is, I mean, if we're going to be allocating a whole bunch of effort and time and energy in certain areas, why not focus it on something like making zero confirmation transactions a lot safer and easier? Instead of doing all this effort for Lightning Network, why don't we just spend 1/1000th of that effort and make zero confirmation transactions more secure and reliable, which can be done very easily by adding in-protocol double spend detection and in-protocol insurance for merchants, so they can get 100% guaranteed zero confirmation transactions. These are all possible things that can be done, but the effort is not focused there. It's just focused on this really, what I consider obscure development path, and
we'll just leave it there. That's good. We're trying to get through these topics as quick as we can. We can come back to them later on, Herman. So the SegWit issue segues right into the Lightning Network. Obviously, the Bitcoin group are for the Lightning Network. This is their solution to their Bitcoin block size issues. You guys, I think, are against the Lightning Network.
No, not at all. No.
Why don't you explain your position, and then I'll give a chance to the Bitcoin group to explain theirs, and we'll try and race through it. So on the topic of the Lightning Network, explain your position as concise as you can,
okay,
and then we'll give the other guys a chance to respond.
So that SegWit thing, first of all, was brought through to enable total control over Bitcoin core protocol to bring in Lightning Network, and it was brought in with the promise of a 2 megabyte block size increase, which they then went back on their word upon, and I actually warned against this because I know how these people operate, and they did indeed fulfill my prediction. So this was a period where Bitcoin was totally collapsing in market dominance because the transaction fees started going up and people were starting to move their money to altcoins in order to transact value. So in their desperate attempt in order to help Bitcoin, the miners agreed and the community ended up agreeing to this bad deal, which then they got double-crossed on. So Herman, would you like to continue?
All right, you go ahead.
So just on Lightning and Layer 2, I just like to make one thing very clear, which is that the Bitcoin Cash community is definitely not against Layer 2 solutions. Like, we honestly, there are applications. So
explain what Layer 2 is.
So Layer 2 is basically, the Lightning Network is considered a Layer 2 solution. So basically that's a layer where you can conduct lots of microtransactions that is off-chain, and then there's just one settlement transaction or two settlement transactions at the end where the final value of that channel is settled. And so, if you had a situation where you're buying, consuming news stories that cost 1/10 of a cent each, or listening to songs that cost, 1/10 of a cent each, there's a real a business case for that kind of micro-transactional gateway where you are opening a channel and slowly consuming a small amount of money over time. But what's happened with Bitcoin and with the Lightning Network is that this Layer 2 solution, which is great for certain kind of marginal business cases where on-chain transactions maybe don't make sense, that's now being sold as a solution for all transactions. And because of, or not all transactions below, maybe $30 or $40. I don't know what. Maybe you guys can tell us what.
Is it five each? Is it still on our 5 or?
Well, yeah, just try and keep it brief.
Yeah, I'll make it brief. So Bitcoin Cash supporters aren't necessarily against Lightning Network. In fact, the opposite is true. The Lightning Network, once it finally, if and when it is finally developed and tested and it works, it will actually work far better on the Bitcoin Cash network for this reason. that settlement transactions with the Bitcoin Cash network will be virtually free. So that means you won't have all the other risks you do on Bitcoin core chain with the Lightning Network, with the 1 megabyte limit and the settlements. With Bitcoin Cash, if you use Lightning Network, fine, use it on Bitcoin Cash chain, and guess what? If you want to settle your transaction, it's not going to cost you anything. So it's economically, technically better on Bitcoin Cash anyway, even if you support the Lightning Network. So being pro-Lightning Network doesn't necessarily mean you have to be anti-Bitcoin Cash. And vice versa.
Cool, so pass the mic down to the Bitcoin group. So if I can just rephrase this as a layman, what you're saying is that this layer 2, it's where they open up a channel so that instead of me sending a Bitcoin or a Bitcoin Cash token to you, we open up a channel at the end of the night, we close the channel, we reduce the number of transactions on the main layer because we've got a separate layer opened up. And you guys are saying that you're cool with that, you've got no problems with it, it'll work better on your network than theirs anyway.
If you wanted to use it, but you don't need to use it, that's the thing.
Yeah, cool. So we'll let the Bitcoin group respond.
Apart from a lot of the technical bubble, I guess my main drive is merchant adoption. And I work day and night with merchant adoption and users. We have enabled Lightning payments. It works. The transaction fees are minuscule. You can go downstairs to the bar downstairs and make a purchase of a beer with Lightning payments. It's been enabled because we've adopted Segwit. Segwit and now enabled Lightning payments. You can also make a purchase with Bitcoin Cash because we've also enabled Bitcoin Cash payments. Both of them work. There's no reason.
Does anyone force that to happen? Or does the consumer choose?
The consumer chooses. All of you can choose which payment method works. They are both cheap, transaction fees. There's nothing wrong with Segwit.
Yeah, my biggest issue around this is, I think in one breath, there's this angle or attack saying that Lightning Network is going to re-centralize it and it's owned by the Bilderbergs or whatever and it's going to fuck up Bitcoin, but then on the other hand, it's like, oh no, but it's okay, we're happy to use it. So that's where I see a bit of dissonance, and I don't know if you guys agree with that or not. That's part one. Part two, though, is you need transaction malleability to be solved, so that piece that Segregated Witness solves to make Lightning actually work. Arguably, some people say there's solutions where you can do Lightning without Segwit, but it's not as secure, it's not as safe because you've opened up the payment channel so you can attack that payment channel before it's closed. So I think for Lightning to work properly, and I think the people who are engineering Lightning have a much better grasp on how to architect that from an infrastructure perspective and to make sure that it operates much more like a mesh network as opposed to a hub and spoke type network. So I think Lightning, the biggest reason I like Lightning, it reminds me of, I've actually got a slide here, like everything in nature operates on a artery and capillary model, which means it's kind of like a settlement layer, and then you've got your off-chain or your Lightning on the top of it. So you keep the core chain for things that need for settlement effectively, and then you abstract all the bullshit off it. And I think Lightning is a really elegant solution along with Segwit to do that. And you see it in plumbing, you see it in electrical, you see it in humans, you see it in nature, you see it everywhere, and it just makes sense to me.
Well, Alex, this is great. So both Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash are in agreement that Lightning is a good thing. We've achieved some harmony.
Well,
so,
I never agreed to that.
No. Hayden does agree.
It's not
a good thing.
Yeah, I've got the mic. So there's a couple of things you'll hear from the Bitcoin Cash team. So we often hear them refer back to the white paper and the vision of Satoshi. And they go back and they make the claim about the Bitcoin white paper was around peer-to-peer transactions. However, as Herman just said, they also talk about zero confirmation transactions, which is not in the white paper. Satoshi actually mentions that block confirmation is a feature. So they seem to be conflicting or contradicting themselves with the vision of the white paper and what their agenda is. So there's a few other things. So just because it's peer-to-peer Lightning, like as my bartender analogy tried to explain, that it is still payment to payment. It may just not be settled in N period of time. And the only other point I'd like to make on the Lightning Network and the vision of Satoshi and the white paper. I'm sure we can all think of a text that may have been printed years ago that, if we still believe was true, may not be relevant today. And we also remember that in software or in IT that we've seen scaling problems before. The initial vision of the internet was that every device had an IP address. So I think this is analogous to what the Bitcoin Cash proponents are saying, that if it's not peer-to-peer, then it's not really Bitcoin. So with the internet, they brought out a technology called NAT. So when your machine at home gets onto the internet, it doesn't have its own IP address. It goes to your router, which your router then has an IP address. And I think that's similar to the Lightning Network. But I still believe that it's the internet. And we've also tried to bring out other solutions like IPv6, which address that. But market forces say, we don't care, that IPv4 with NAT and other technologies analogous to layer 2 just works. So I'm arguing that, okay, maybe the core chain just works and these other layer technologies will facilitate the payment mechanisms that we need.
Well, I'm sure we can readdress that later on. We've got a couple more topics, then we'll get to the questions from the audience. The next one is fees. So Lucas, since you've got the microphone in your hand there, this is another issue. I'll try and give some context as a layman before you guys get into your points. One of the big problems with Bitcoin was that when the price spiked, it cost far too much to use it in any practical sense. So the Bitcoin Cash people are saying that they, because they've got bigger block sizes, even if there was a price parity in the two coins, they would still be cheaper to do transactions with because there's more space on the block. So the context here is that Bitcoin are saying that we're going to keep the same size blocks, but this may lead to larger fees when we're using them, which is the whole idea. Bitcoin Cash is saying, let's increase the size of the blocks. Ipso facto, fees will come down. With that being the context, why is your solution, why is Bitcoin superior when it comes to fees?
It's a null argument. So the only time, I think I did the math the other day, the only time Bitcoin fees have been more than $2 in the lifetime of Bitcoin is for about 2 or 3% of Bitcoin's existence. It only happened last year because we had some speculative bubble that made the tulip mania look like intelligent investing. So that was like the, if you transact on Bitcoin now, it's not going to cost you jack shit. It'll cost you 5 cents, 10 cents, and just because you can save 4 cents using Bitcoin Cash, for the sacrifice of trending towards a model that's less secure, less decentralized, it's less censorship resistant, I think that's where the flaw in the logic is. But at the moment, fees are not a discussion. There is not enough global adoption for Bitcoin as a transactional currency because it's not a fucking currency yet. It needs to build as a network. It needs to build its network value first before that stuff comes into place. So at the moment, fees are not even a discussion. I think it's pointless.
Yeah, and fees are a feature, not a bug. So it's without the central authority policing this. It's a capitalistic market. If you want your transaction to go faster, well, you just have to pay for it. There's nothing stopping you sending a Bitcoin transaction with 0 fees. Just probably never get mined. So it's, you know, it's up to us. So, yeah.
Do you want to pass the mic down to Brendan to respond?
Can I say 2 things first?
Yeah, just quick.
Look, now that Lightning payments are enabled, fees are less than 1 cent. Fees are no longer an issue. If you're doing large $10,000 transactions not on the Lightning network, you can pay a few 10 cents, 20 cents to move large amounts. But for coffee transactions, it's less than 1 cent to use the Lightning network. It's enabled across merchants now. It's there. So I don't think fees are an issue. If you look at our stats on user adoption, I've looked at our stats, over $8 million a week of cryptocurrency payments are made over the different platforms in Australia. If you look at the usage, less than 5% is Bitcoin Cash, or despite the fees being lower than Bitcoin. Most of the transactions are still on Bitcoin. Shows me that sometimes Bitcoin Cash is also used as a store of value if no one's actually using it very much on the network. So I think fees are not the issue with, it's not a major issue in terms of adoption.
So I guess I'd like to thoroughly disagree with that last statement and just say that I think fees and the fee event that we saw last December, where you had a period of, I think it was nearly 3 or 4 months, where no transactions were able to get processed on the Bitcoin network for less than 10 Satoshis per byte fees, which you know, for a lot of people meant that, you know, even to do one transaction was costing, you know, several tens of dollars. And for merchants and just day-to-day commerce, you know, that's an unusable scenario. So to paint the vision for Bitcoin Cash, I guess what I'd like to do is fast forward 10 years into the future, into a time when we have 10 billion people using the Bitcoin network every day, each person making 50 transactions a day. So, you know, we're talking 500 billion transactions per day. And we look at, well, what would happen to fees in that situation? Well, they would plummet. And you could reasonably say that no transaction would cost more than 1 Satoshi. And in that situation, you know, you're paying, you know, like a fraction of a cent for each transaction, but the mining reward being paid to the network for each block is going to be somewhere around between 30 and 50 Bitcoins. So, you know, roughly about, I think that's about 6 times what we expect the block reward to be by then. So really what is going to pay for the Bitcoin Cash network to grow beyond its current scale is a massive volume of transactions, but each paying a really tiny fee. And that is the long-term vision for Bitcoin. You know, there was never, I think, a question in Satoshi's mind whether fees would become pushed upon the users to pay for the mining network. You know, the vision was always really low fees. It's a low friction currency. And I think what we'll see is a return to the meteoric growth that we saw in the early days of the Bitcoin network. So I've been back through the numbers, and you can see back in sort of 2011, 2012, Bitcoin was more than doubling in size every 3 to 6 months. And there was one period of growth where Bitcoin exploded by 600% in just 6 months. And what you can see at the end of each of those huge growth spurts, and when I say growth, I'm not talking growth in price. I'm talking growth in the numbers of transactions being processed by the network. What we can see at the end of each of those big growth spikes is we start hitting the block limit more and more, and fees go up, and users go away because they find that, yeah, they can't use the network.
All right, I can talk now? Okay. So, just a few points to correct on the previous things that you said. So, zero confirmation transactions, you said they weren't mentioned in the Satoshi white paper, but I've just Googled here a quote from Satoshi Nakamoto himself on July 17, 2010. It says, "I believe it will be possible for a payment processing company to provide as a service the rapid distribution of transactions with good enough checking in something like 10 seconds or less." So what he's saying is pretty much exactly what I said before, that merchants should be able to accept transactions within 10 seconds on the chain, and that will be good enough for merchant transactions. And in fact, I would say most of your stores that are using your system, they're relying on zero confirmation transactions, not on the Lightning Network. And the point is that with the Lightning Network, fine, just because we're not against the Lightning Network, it doesn't mean that we're for it, okay? And my beef is that, well, all that energy, effort, and focus on the Lightning Network, if we just focused 1/1000th of it on making zero confirmations better and more reliable and more secure, then we would actually achieve Satoshi's vision in 2015, and we wouldn't be having this discussion now. We would be discussing why, you know, the next frontier of the Bitcoin, adoption wave that should have happened by now. And that's just what I want to say on that.
No, that's good, Herman. So this is why we wanted a moderator, guys. We need to move on to the last topic, and it's kind of segue as well, because the thing with fees is that mining centralisation is a direct function of the fees that are involved if you're a Bitcoin miner. So how's this for an idea? I'll give Lucas a quick chance to respond to Herman's accusations really quickly. Then you guys lead that discussion on the mining centralisation. That'll be our last topic. And then we'll go to
I was responding to
questions
his accusations. That would be a response to response. Do I get a counter response to response to response? Or?
After the show, all right? And then once we've gotten through the last topic, then we'll go to questions from the audience. Sound good?
Yeah, I mean, there's always talks of zero confirmations. Just for those who don't know, it's like a probabilistic thing. If you're doing a coffee, do you care if it's zero confirmation? Like, it's just a risk it could get rolled back or not mined. But I guess we'll jump into fees. I'll go through it quickly and I'll throw it to the audience. I think it's probably time to wrap it up. So if you want, we'll just go through mining centralisation quickly. Yeah. So I guess the argument about, to me, bigger blocks will probably introduce mining centralisation. Could be argued that, well, you know, you need higher bandwidth to download those blocks, so maybe not so many miners can do that. There's also some game theory there about, you know, holding blocks back and
No more propaganda and subliminal messaging on the screen.
So,
I knew that would be it.
All right, well,
It's starting to trigger me.
Well, I'm happy just to just throw to the audience if you want to.
Just before you do, this is a very important point. Yeah. The mining centralisation, this is one of the big arguments that the Bitcoin Cash group are making. So you want to pass the microphone over to Brenda just to explain to the layman why this is a big issue in your opinion and how your solution is superior to theirs.
Okay. So I'd just like to make one thing very clear to anyone out there who thinks that you need to run your own node to validate your own transactions and all this kind of stuff. That is completely untrue. The Bitcoin network, and I say this for both versions of Bitcoin, only works if miners make money. If the Bitcoin network was relying on altruistic people to have their own computers where they pay for the storage and pay for the bandwidth and pay to upkeep this computer and prove it over time, without actually receiving any financial benefit from that, the project would fail. And so that's why the incentive structures have been built the way they are. So just to give you a good idea of the scale of Bitcoin mining, so there are roughly 4,400 blocks per month mined on each chain. Currently, globally, there are 40 exahashes of hash power. So that means that to win just one block per month, you need the equivalent of, it's 9 petahashes, which is the equivalent of about 600 Bitmain S9 ant miners, which is about $2 million worth of mining gear. That's to win one block per month. So that gives you an idea of the scale of these mining operations now. So if if you're trying to run a node at home and you're not thinking ASIC miners, forget it, just do the network a favor, turn it off. Now, if we go again, fast forward 20 years in the future, that one block reward per month, so currently that's about $100,000. So that's 12.5 Bitcoins plus 12.5 Bitcoin cash that you're winning from your 600 ant miners. Fast forward into the future, and where we have terabyte blocks, well, now you're winning 100 of each coin. So, that multiplies the amount of money that's being churned by that Bitcoin mining operation and really turns that into a global industry. And that's when decentralization is really going to spread. Decentralizing is not about everybody having a Bitcoin node in their basement. Decentralizing is having a global network of computers, all of which are capable of logging, validating, and storing every Bitcoin transaction that happens every day. And that's the critical thing to understand about centralization and Bitcoin mining. So I think that's about all I want to say about that.
Comment on that. So I just wanted to say that there is a big attack on miners, which is totally unjustified because they are really the ones who are verifying the integrity of the network and upholding that. And they're putting in proof of work. They're investing money into maintaining this network, and they're rewarded for doing so. So that's why it's so important. And basically there's big attacks on these groups like Bitmain, and they say, oh, it's a big centralized entity, but that's just how capitalism works because they have patented the ASIC miner technology. They've got the best technology on these coins, obviously because it's profitable for them to mine, and people are welcome to come and challenge that and develop better technologies in order to surpass Bitmain and then patent their own technologies. So it's competitive, and these attacks are mostly stemming from other organizations who are operating inferior mining setups, who are just having a whinge because basically they're not as profitable anymore. No one's restricting the technology. They're selling these miners freely to everybody, and you're welcome to go and buy one. It's not like they're the only guys who are withholding that to themselves.
What is it?
I don't think anyone's here is against mining. I mean, mining secures Bitcoin, basically.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I've been mining, and Hayden, you know this,
Yeah.
I've been mining for fucking ages, and I mean, I've got nothing against mining. I think my issue with it is, it's just it's a single layer of validation, so it's a single layer of verification. It's, and I actually agree that over time mining will commoditize, so that will help with the decentralization of that layer. But I think having, I mean, if I asked you the question, why the hell do so many full nodes exist at the moment?
I would say
and why has that assisted with Bitcoin's growth?
the only full node that has any say in the direction of a network is a full node that mines blocks. You can have a full node.
So why do the rest exist? What people just drug fuck to like just set up a miner for a node for no reason?
The answer to your question is that okay, so this is a very ubiquitous argument that's promulgated from the Bitcoin core camp to say, well, only really, what are these other nodes? Do you really need these other nodes? And I would say, well, if you're a merchant and you're accepting payments, then you're not mining Bitcoin, but you still need to monitor the chain to see that you're getting a payment, and therefore you're going to be a node. Now you can be a light node or a full node, but that's a use case there. And also, if you're doing analytics on the blockchain, which is a product that I've developed, which I sell to the small, large, and mid-sized companies that that they use that to analyze the blockchain. So there's many use cases for a node, and it should be important to understand that the more nodes, the better, because it's more decentralized. And the argument against that you'll say about Bitcoin Cash is that the more storage requirement you have, the bigger the less nodes you'll have. Well, actually, there are solutions to that, but they're very technical. And if you wanted to talk about that, I'd love to get into that detail. But it looks like my time's up. So
well, there is an after party later on. Now we're scheduled to finish at 8:30. Which means we've only got 20 minutes or so for the audience to ask their questions. I'm sure they've got plenty. Are you guys comfortable if I walk around the room and they can ask a question of one of you, of all of you? It's up to the audience. You guys cool with that? All right, so hands up. Let's get some questions. The gentleman in front.
Hey guys. Ivan Jasinovic from the Sunshine Coast, or on the Sunshine Coast blockchain event, and a couple other things. I'm a pretty geeky guy from the network side. I have to say that I came here with a completely different agenda, but I'm now enamored with this argument. I'm going to have to spend some more time online with you guys. When it comes to Moore's law around the network right now, we're nowhere near what capacity is. In my network capacity as a network engineer, we're already at the petabyte level per second within a local transaction using IP6 internationally. We just need to keep a consistent non-routing framework, and we can get those blocks at any level written with any speed whatsoever. The problem is it does become a true spoken hub, because everybody is going to be talking one-to-one. We're not going to need routing. We're not going to need all of these other functions. Yeah. So when you're okay,
yeah, it's working.
Oh, it is. Hello. When you're looking at these network functions and trying to argue network probability, I think that all the technical arguments can just go out the window. We used to do networks, star networks and token ring networks, and we thought that was the end all to anything. What we don't have in this framework yet is a stack. And what you guys are arguing is the argument we had in the 80s around the IP stack. This is the same thing. We were moving from phone technology, going digital, and we needed to create protocols, standards, redundancy, and all these other things. A true mesh network, even today, doesn't really exist because we don't have a global one. We don't have the data capacity that we need for what you guys are talking about, but all these solutions are coming. So I think we're just too early in the conversation.
Excellent. All right, thanks. We'll take that as a comment.
Can I just address some of what was said there? So it's a fairly common misconception that Bitcoin is a mesh network, and what you actually need to understand is that these miners, so say you're a miner who mines one block per month or more than one block per month, that probably puts you in the top maybe 300 to 500 nodes in the world.
You mean win a block?
Winning blocks, yeah. So that's all we're really concerned about here is nodes that can win blocks. So these are nodes that have at least probably $5 million worth of hash power connected. They have a very powerful node there to validate the block. They are paying for like multi-gigabit Ethernet connection onto the internet so that they can both download and propagate any blocks that they find very, very quickly. So what happens is these miners, if you find a block, what you'll find is that all of the other miners will try to make a direct connection to you. And these miners form what's called a small world network. So basically what that means is that each block winning miner is directly connected to each other block winning miner. So if you make a transaction on the Bitcoin network and your wallet sends that transaction to a block winning miner, within one hop, pretty much 99% of the hash power on the network knows about your transaction. So it makes it extremely efficient.
All right, so we'll go to the next question there. So is it, we need direct question. Oh, that was a great comment, but we need direct questions. So you've got a concise question for the panel?
So I'm an actual merchant, and at the moment with FPOS, crypto, everything else, we do about $1 million a year just in transactions. So my question for both sides is, which one can facilitate that the fastest for millions of small business owners around the world, and to make sure we get our money as fast as possible so our suppliers and everything can work much faster?
Well, on Bitcoin Cash, you've got zero confirmation peer-to-peer transactions, and then you're receiving it directly without the influence of a third party that has to pass through, of course, but these guys...
We have zero confirmation peer-to-peer transactions.
Which is what his clients accept, right?
No, it's a good point. At our day, for any of this to work is merchant and user adoptions. There's a lot of merchants have taken a brave step to test this technology, spending their staff time training people, and there's not a lot of users. Either chain doesn't have too much users. There's more users on the Bitcoin chain rather than the Bitcoin Cash chain, but it's up to the users to use the network. The fees are cheap, both are scalable at this point of time. Both are Lightning works and there's no fees. Bitcoin Cash is really cheap as well.
So Rob, quick question. Why do you want this solution? It's to save money, right?
Oh, time and money.
Okay, time and money. Yeah, okay, cool. All right. So, my whole theory around this whole problem is that we're focusing on the wrong part. You are an anomaly. You're a merchant who gets the space. The rest of the merchants out there don't know about it. They're actually shit scared about it.
They will get it eventually.
Correct. So here's the thing. If we pitch them to say, come and save some money, and they accumulate a bunch of whatever currency they get, and the ship drops 50% tomorrow,